What kind of parents look their own son in the eye and say, "Why are you here? We didn't invite you." On Thanksgiving, I used to believe that, no matter what, family was supposed to stand by each other. That no matter how flawed, how unfair, how downright cruel they could be at times, blood was still thicker than water. But this Thanksgiving, my parents proved to me, beyond any doubt, that I was never really family to them. It started with a phone call from my younger brother, Jesse. He told me that this year would be different, that our parents missed me, that my kids deserved to know their grandparents. And like an idiot, I let myself believe him. I dressed my son, Noah, in a button-down shirt. My daughter, Avery, picked out her favorite sunflower dress. I even brought a bottle of wine for my dad and an autumn floral arrangement for my mom, just to show I was making an effort. But when we arrived, there were no seats for us at the table. No plates. No room. My father barely looked at me when he said it. "Why are you here? We didn't invite you." Noah stared up at me, confused. Avery gripped my hand tighter. And in that moment, I knew I was done trying to belong to a family that never wanted me. This is the true story of Garrett Langford, originally shared on our /amwithasshole, one of Reddit's largest communities for real-life moral dilemmas. His post went viral, sparking thousands of reactions, debates, and discussions. Before we continue, if you love real-life stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Reddit True Vault. Your support helps bring more incredible stories to life. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself, I could earn my parents' respect. That one day, they'd see me as more than just their biggest disappointment. I was wrong. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, the oldest of 3 kids in the Langford family. My father, Walter Langford, is a well-known real estate attorney and the founder of Langford Law Group. My mother, Eleanor, has never worked a day in her life, but she keeps herself busy with charity events, country club luncheons, and looking down on people who don't fit her definition of refined. To them, success means power, prestige, status. It means following the path they've chosen for you, whether you want it or not. And I didn't, but I never wanted it. The idea of law bored me to death. I was fascinated by numbers, markets, investments. I wanted to build something on my own, not inherit it. So when I told them I was going to study finance instead of law, their disappointment was instant and absolute. My father scoffed. My mother's face went blank, like I'd told her I was dropping out to join a traveling circus. And then there was Sienna. Sienna, the perfect child. The one who did everything they wanted. Went to the right schools, dated the right men, married into the right family. She became a marketing executive at Holloway and Company, the company her husband Brandon's family owns. Everything about her life is curated to fit their upper-crust standards, from the designer handbags to the networking brunches. She thrived in the world I never fit into. I still remember the way my mother beamed at her when she graduated from business school. She threw Sienna a grand party, invited Charleston's elite, gave a speech about how proud she was. When I graduated, we had a quiet dinner at home. No party, no speech, just an awkward, forced congratulations from my dad before he changed the subject. That was my first real taste of how little I mattered to them. And then there was Jesse. Jesse, my younger brother, who spent his whole life caught between us. Jesse is a good guy. A quiet, thoughtful guy. He became an accountant. Not flashy, not prestigious, but stable, reliable. Unlike Sienna, he never actively tried to impress our parents. Unlike me, he never openly rebelled against them. He just existed in this strange in-between space, where they neither praised nor punished him. He saw the way they treated me. He even told me once, "It's messed up how they treat you, man." He never stood up for me when they belittled my career. Never contradicted them when they acted like I was less than Sienna. And I never blamed him for it. Because Jesse learned something early on, something it took me years to understand. Arguing with our parents is pointless. The final proof came when I bought my first home. It wasn't a mansion, not by their standards. It was a beautiful, cozy house in a nice neighborhood, something I was proud of because I worked my ass off to afford it. I invited my parents over for dinner, hoping maybe, just maybe, they'd acknowledge what I had built. They walked through the house with polite smiles, barely hiding their disinterest. "It's nice," my mother had said vaguely, before changing the subject to Sienna's latest investment property. A year later, when Sienna and Brandon bought a larger house in a gated community, my parents threw them a housewarming party. Catered. Champagne. Dozens of guests. I wasn't even invited. For years, my parents built their image as Charleston's elite, attending galas, donating to high-profile charities, ensuring their names carried prestige. But beneath that polished facade, things weren't as stable as they seemed. The legal industry had changed. Competition grew, and my father's once prestigious firm struggled to keep up. Clients left for more aggressive, modern firms. My mother, unwilling to accept this reality, continued spending as if nothing had changed. When their mortgage payments fell behind, I stepped in. When the IRS came knocking, I bailed them out. And every time they called me the disappointment, every time they treated me like an outsider, I reminded myself, family takes care of each other. But standing in that grand dining room on Thanksgiving, I finally saw the truth. I wasn't family to them. I was their safety net. For too long, I convinced myself that one day, they would appreciate what I did for them. That they would look at me and see someone who had built a life worth being proud of. But I was never their pride, only their fallback plan when things went wrong. And yet, despite everything, I still wanted their approval. I still wanted them to love me. But then I realized something. I already had a family that loved me. One that never measured my worth in dollar signs. There are two kinds of families in this world. The one you're born into, and the one you choose. For years, I tried to force my parents to love the family I built. I believed, naively, that one day, they would look past their obsession with social status and just see us. Me, Lena, our kids. But they never did. Lena has always been the kind of person who fights for what matters. She doesn't tolerate manipulation, and she sure as hell doesn't let people walk all over the people she loves. When I first introduced her to my parents, I remember the polite but cold way my mother smiled at her. How she had Lena's dress, not designer. How she commented, "Oh, a psychology major. That's interesting." Lena squeezed my hand under the table, her silent way of saying, "I see what's happening. And I'm not bothered." That's the thing about Lena. She never needed their approval. She never tried to impress them. Never bent over backward to fit into a mold they had already rejected me from. And maybe that's why they never accepted her. Because she wouldn't play their games. I used to think I was the strong one in this relationship. That I was the one protecting her. But over the years, I realized something. Lena is the one who protected me. And when I told her, year after year, that maybe, this time, things would be different, she never crushed my hope. She just smiled softly and said, maybe, because she knew I had to figure it out for myself. My kids are everything. Noah, my 10-year-old, with his love for baseball stats and his sharp, analytical mind. He's just like me. He already talks about money and investments, even though his current portfolio consists of trading baseball cards with his friends. Avery, my 7-year-old, with her sunflower dresses and endless curiosity. She reads everything she can get her hands on. She once asked me, "Dad, why do people pretend to like other people?" I didn't have an answer for her. Not one I wanted to say out loud. They don't know the full extent of how their grandparents treat me, but they feel it. They know their grandpa Walter and grandma Eleanor never really engage with them. That every interaction is forced, performative, something to be endured rather than cherished. Noah picked up on it before Avery did. He once asked, "How come grandma always asks about Sienna's kids, but never remembers my baseball team?" And what was I supposed to say to that? I wanted to tell him, because to them, you don't matter as much. But I couldn't. So instead, I said, some people are just bad at showing love, bud. It's not your fault, but it was their fault. And the worst part? I still thought things could change. But I wasn't just holding on a hope for myself. I was holding on to it for my kids, too. I wanted them to have grandparents who truly cared, a family that welcomed them with open arms. But in my parents' eyes, that kind of love was reserved for only one person, Sienna. Sienna and I have never been close. Growing up, she was always their pride and joy. The golden child. The one who never questioned them. Who followed their blueprint for success to the letter. She went to the right schools. Dated the right people. Married Brandon Holloway. A man whose last name alone opened doors in our city. To my parents, she had one. Sienna had a real husband. A successful, polished, respected businessman. Someone who could be paraded around at charity galas. Who looked good in photos. Who belonged to their world. And me? I was the disappointment who married a woman with a middle-class background and no valuable connections. I built my career myself. Worked from the ground up. Became a CFO on my own merit. But none of that mattered. Because I didn't play the game their way. And Sienna knew it. She used to pretend she didn't see the difference in how they treated us. She'd brush it off, say, "You're being dramatic, Garrett." But she saw it. And I know that because of one conversation. A few years ago, at a family event, I caught her watching Lena and me from across the room. Something about the way we laughed together, how easy it was, made her expression tighten. She walked over, swirling her wine, and said, "Must be nice." I frowned. "What?" She hesitated. Then, softer, quieter, she said, being happy. That was the first and only time Sienna ever admitted, even indirectly, that she wasn't. I didn't push. I knew she wouldn't answer, but I never forgot that moment. Because for all her perfectly curated life, all her social standing, all the validation from our parents, Sienna envied me. I used to think they'd come around, too. That one day, they'd see my family for what it was, real. That they'd look at Lena and finally, say, "She's good for you." That they'd see Noah and Avery and think, "These are our grandchildren. We should love them." But they never did. To them, we were less. And the cruelest part? I spent years trying to change their minds. I let their opinions creep into my head. I let them make me doubt myself. I let them make me feel like I wasn't enough. And it took me far too long to realize they were the ones who weren't enough. Not me, not Lena, not my kids, them. Because love isn't about wealth or appearances or networking. It's about showing up, about making space, about choosing someone over and over again. And I was done choosing them. Jesse had been calling me for weeks. "They've changed, Garrett. Mom keeps asking about the kids. Dad said he regrets how things have been. I really think this year could be different." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. For years, I had held on to the hope that my parents would finally see me, not just as the son who had disappointed them, but as the man I had become. A husband, a father, a provider. Someone who had built his own life, his own success, even without their approval. So against my better judgment, I decided to give them one last chance. I dressed Noah and Avery in their best clothes. I packed a bottle of wine for my dad and a bouquet of autumn flowers for my mom. I told Lena to stay home and rest, not wanting her to stress with how far along she was in her pregnancy. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, hand resting on her belly. No, but I couldn't tell her that, so I just kissed her forehead and said, "It'll be fine." When I arrived at my parents' house, I immediately knew something was off. The driveway was packed with luxury cars, Sienna's BMW, Brandon's sleek Mercedes, and my father's Jaguar gleaming in the late afternoon sun. The moment I stepped inside, it hit me. The atmosphere. It was warm, cozy, and filled with the scent of roasted turkey and spiced cider. The dining room table was a picture-perfect Thanksgiving setup. China plates, real silverware, crystal glasses catching the soft glow of candlelight. And then I noticed something else. There were no extra seats, not even a single spare plate. The room fell silent as we walked in. My mother was adjusting the turkey, avoiding my gaze. My father stood with his arms crossed, looking at me like I was an intruder. Sienna, seated next to him, smirked. And then, my father finally spoke. "Why are you here? We didn't invite you." I felt Noah tense beside me. Avery's little fingers tightened around mine. I swallowed hard. "Jesse said you wanted us here." Jesse looked like he wanted to disappear. I thought. "You thought wrong," my father said flatly. "We already have our family here." His words sliced through me like a knife. "We already have our family here. Not me. Not my kids. Just them." I glanced at Sienna, who was delicately cutting a piece of turkey as if none of this was happening. Brandon was sipping his wine, not even bothering to look in my direction. For years, I had bit my tongue. For years, I had let them dismiss me, belittle me, make me feel like I was nothing. But this time, something snapped. "You know what?" I said, forcing out a laugh that sounded colder than I intended. "I get it now. You don't need me." I looked directly at my parents, watching the way my father's lips curled in disdain, the way my mother couldn't even meet my eyes. "And you know what that means." I continued. I saw Sienna's smirk waver. My father's expression shifted slightly. "It means I don't need to keep paying your mortgage anymore." The room went completely, utterly silent. Sienna's fork clattered against her plate. My mother's eyes snapped to me in horror. My father's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You what?" Sienna choked out. "I'm done," I said simply. "You've made it clear I'm not part of this family. So from now on, I won't be acting like I am." "You don't mean that," my father said, voice tight with barely concealed panic. "Watch me." I turned to Noah and Avery. "Come on, kids. We're leaving." Jesse stepped forward. "Garrett," but I shook my head. "Not now, Jesse." I took my kids' hands and walked out. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. What happens when the son you never valued stops being your safety net? When the one person you always look down on decides he's done carrying your weight, you fall. And that's exactly what happened to my parents. Cutting off the $800 a month was just the beginning. That money was nothing compared to what I'd done for them over the years. The $10,000 I paid to cover their delinquent property taxes before the government seized their home? Gone. The $5,000 I gave them last year to fix their storm-damaged roof? Not happening again. The thousands more I covered in credit card bills, last-minute emergencies, and Sienna's so-called investments that never amounted to anything? Never again. For the first time in years, I kept every single dollar I earned for my own family. And you know what? It felt damn good. At first, my parents acted like they didn't care. It's fine, my mom had told Jesse. We'll be okay. We still have Sienna, right? Sienna, the golden child. The successful one. The pride of the Langford family. Too bad she wasn't nearly as smart as they thought. Just 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, the news broke. Sienna had been fired for fraud. Apparently, she had been signing off on shady financial transactions for her boss, a man who was embezzling funds from the company. Whether she knew or not didn't matter. She was complicit, and suddenly, my parents' last lifeline snapped. Their successful daughter was now jobless, under investigation, and drowning in debt because she spent money like it grew on trees. The house she bragged about? She was behind on the mortgage. The brand new BMW she flaunted? Repossessed within a month. The perfect marriage to Brandon? Cracking under the pressure because Brandon had zero intention of bailing her out. And just like that, my parents' golden ticket was gone. I hadn't spoken to my parents since I walked out on Thanksgiving. But then, Jesse showed up at my door. They're freaking out, man, he said. Mom's a mess. Dad doesn't know what to do. Sienna's completely falling apart. I just raised an eyebrow. And this is my problem, because… Jesse sighed. I know they don't deserve it, but they're desperate. Can't you just help them one last time? Help them, like I hadn't already spent years doing that? I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. They made it pretty damn clear that I don't belong in their family. Why should I bail them out now? Jesse didn't have an answer. He just looked down, like he knew I was right. I thought that was the end of it. But a few nights later, my phone rang. 1:17 a.m. Jesse's name flashed on the screen. I almost ignored it. Almost. And when I did, his voice was shaking. Garrett, it's Dad. He's in the hospital. Chest pains. It's bad. I just stood there, gripping my phone. I should have felt something, right? Panic. Concern. Fear. But all I felt was exhaustion. Because deep down, I knew this moment was inevitable. Years of stress. Years of bad financial decisions. Years of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. It had finally caught up to him. Jesse's voice broke through the silence. Mom's asking for you. She needs you to come. I closed my eyes, letting out a slow breath. I had a choice to make. Go back. Or finally let them deal with the mess they created. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure what to do. I sat in my car outside the hospital, hands gripping the steering wheel. I had no idea why I was here. Lena was the one who convinced me to come. Just go, she had said, her voice calm but firm. Not to fix anything. Not to give them money. Just to see for yourself. And so, for the first time in years, I was walking into my parents' world with nothing to offer but my presence. When I stepped into the hospital room, the first thing I noticed was how small my father looked. Walter Langford was a man who had spent his entire life towering over others, literally and figuratively. He commanded boardrooms, dominated conversations, and never once backed down from an argument. But now, he looked fragile, pale, weak. Just a man. Eleanor sat beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap. When she saw me, her eyes welled up with tears. Garrett, she whispered, like she couldn't believe I was real. Jesse was standing near the window, arms crossed, eyes flicking between me and our mother. The tension in the room was suffocating. Eleanor wasted no time. We need help, Garrett. We're drowning. The mortgage, the hospital bills, her voice cracked. We can't do this alone. I should have felt something. Pity, maybe. Or sympathy. But all I felt was exhaustion. I let out a slow breath, then met her eyes. I thought I was just a disappointment. I thought I didn't belong. No, I cut her off. You meant every word. We have nothing left. Her voice was barely a whisper now. Sienna can't help us. Jesse. She glanced at him, and that's when I noticed something was off. He wasn't looking at her. He hesitated. Then, with a look of quiet defeat, he said, "They kicked me out." I stared at him. What? Jesse sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I told them they needed to take responsibility for themselves. That they couldn't keep treating you like a bank account. His voice grew tight. Dad lost it. Told me if I was going to betray the family, I wasn't welcome anymore. I laughed. I couldn't help it. I turned back to my parents. So let me get this straight. You threw me away because I wouldn't follow your rules. And now, because Jesse finally grew a backbone, You're throwing him away too. Silence. Walter Langford, the great and powerful, just closed his eyes and turned his head away. That told me everything I needed to know. This was never about love. This was never about family. This was about control. And the second they lost it, they had no use for us anymore. I looked at Jesse. Come on. You're coming with me. Jesse didn't argue. He just grabbed his coat and followed me out. Eleanor called after me. Garrett, please. We're your family. I didn't even turn around when I said, no. You were just people I used to know. I walked out of that hospital without looking back. For the first time in my life, I knew I was truly free. Bringing Jesse home with me felt right. Lena didn't even blink. She just hugged him and said, you deserve better. Noah and Avery were excited to have their uncle staying with us for a while. And me? For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't worried about their approval. I wasn't waiting for love that would never come. I had my wife, my kids, my real family, and that was more than enough. Family isn't just about blood. It's about love, respect, and the people who truly stand by you. For years, I thought I had to fight for my parents' approval. That if I worked harder, proved myself more, maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see me. But the truth? Some people will never love you the way you deserve to be loved. And when that happens, the hardest but most important choice you can make is to walk away. I didn't lose a family that day. I freed myself from one. Sometimes, the best thing you can do isn't to fix the broken. It's to let go and build something better. What do you think? Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members? What was your breaking point? Share your thoughts below. Like and subscribe to Reddit True Vault for more real-life stories that hit deep.